I have always avoided learning Sanskrit language, because the moment you learn Sanskrit, you will end up reading the scriptures.
About the jewel of the Indian culture, the Sanskrit language, and how an understanding of that can help us to moksha, help us understand aham brahmasmi, the truth.
The sound, any sound, is a reverberation.
Sadhguru said on numerous occasions that he does not know and he doesn't want to know Sanskrit, and yet he speaks of it with so much certainty. This is simply dishonest. No guru would do that. No guru would talk on a subject which he has not studied. Actually, the question was different.
And how an understanding of that can help us to moksha, help us understand aham brahmasmi, the truth.
I have never studied any spirituality, if you don't believe this. I've never made a study of anything. I've not studied with anybody. Why should I burden myself with all that nonsense when it's anyway available all the time, isn't it?
So the significant aspect of Sanskrit language is, it is the closest language to describe. See, every form has a sound attached to it. Every sound has a form attached to it. If you feed a sound into an oscilloscope, you will get a certain pattern depending upon its frequency, amplitude and other dimensions of the sound.
I have always avoided learning Sanskrit language. I didn't want to clutter myself with traditions and scriptures and other things.
Jaggi has no capacity to answer this question, and therefore he avoids it. And you can see this pattern throughout his videos. We would have expected the Western man to talk on the oscilloscope and the so-called guru to give an explanation on aham brahmasmi and Sanskrit. But because Jaggi's ignorance keeps him away from spiritual scriptures and Sanskrit, Jaggi talks on the oscilloscope.
See, every form has a sound attached to it. Every sound has a form attached to it. If you feed a sound into an oscilloscope, you will get a certain pattern depending upon its frequency, amplitude and other dimensions of the sound. So, every sound has a form attached to it and every form has a sound attached to it. So, the relationship between the form and the sound was probably, I wouldn't say it's perfect, but brought closest in Sanskrit language. That is, if you utter a word in that language, you are relating to the form.
What Jaggi is talking about here is from the research on language forms and the reverberation of patterns through the oscilloscope. This experiment was described by Madhukana in her works. When Jaggi talks, he never cites his sources. He pretends that it all comes from his enlightenment, whereas he conveniently lifts it from the traditional guru, Bhagavan Sri Shanmukha, also known as Palaniswami.
The significance of Sanskrit language is, if you listen to nature, if you pay attention to the reverb of the nature, you would know the language.
Jaggi really does not understand the Sanskrit language. In India, there is a distinction between Sanskrit and Prakrit. Prakrit is a language that is close to nature, that reverbs closely. Sanskrit is a language of the gods, or Devanagari. It essentially classes as a scientific language like Latin in the Western world.
If you pay attention to the reverb of the nature, you would know the language.
If we are to follow Jaggi's logic, that would simply mean that Sanskrit can be easily learned by listening to the reverb of nature. If that method works, then why Jaggi himself makes blunders after blunders with Sanskrit words? Jaggi does not know Sanskrit and covers it up by making up things.
First of all, what's Rudraksh? You know what's Rudraksh? Rudra means Shiva, Aksha means teardrops. Shiva's teardrops.
Aksha does not mean teardrops. Aksha means eyes. Therefore, Rudraksha becomes Rudra's eyes. Ashru is the word for tears in Sanskrit.
So your Janivaram, what do you call this?
Okay, what do you call it in Hindi or Marathi or whatever? Whatever, the thread, the sacred thread.
The sacred thread is called Yajnapavita in Sanskrit, and any Indian guru should know it. In fact, an average Indian person knows it.
Where in any of our Indian languages, there is no word for a heretic.
The Sanskrit word for heretic is Nastika, and it is often used in Indian spiritual scriptures. If Jaggi knew Sanskrit, he would not make these mistakes. It is silly to talk on a subject Jaggi himself said he has not studied. This shows Jaggi is always having an opinion without knowledge. It is not only Sanskrit that Jaggi refused to study. Jaggi Vasudev does not speak Hindi.
Then you learn a little bit of Hindi then.
No, we won't.
You want?
No.
Jaggi Vasudev cannot speak and read Tamil.
இப்போ நான் பாருங்க தமிழ் பேசுறேன், தமிழ் மாதிரியே இருக்குது இது. புரியுது ஏதோ ஓரளவுக்கு, ஆனா தமிழ்னு சொல்ல முடியாது நான் பேசுறது, தமிழ் மாதிரி ஏதோ ஒன்று பேசிக்கிறேன்.
The fact that Jaggi Vasudev has no knowledge of Sanskrit, Tamil, Hindi proves that Jaggi Vasudev could not have accessed the original texts in either Sanskrit, Tamil or Hindi. In fact, without knowledge of Sanskrit, Jaggi Vasudev has no other source than the written works or lecture notes of Bhagavan Sri Shanmukha, also known as Palaniswami, and Ma Kristina. This is easily provable because Bhagavan Sri Shanmukha and Ma Kristina have published the books in the year 2001, from which Jaggi Vasudev is flicking to support his false enlightenment claims. These concepts, Akasha, Vibhuti, Karma, Soma, Krishna as conscious being, avatars, Shiva and so on, are clearly explained for the first time by Bhagavan Sri Shanmukha, who is also known as Palaniswami, in his work, The Divine Initiation. Nowhere else were these topics explained before this book. Not in any other language, not in Tamil, not in Hindi, not in English. The only reason Jaggi Vasudev falsely used these explanations in his clips to build his guruship is because Jaggi knows that the court systems in Tamil Nadu can be exploited to his advantage. This can be seen in the avoidance of the court systems in dealing with Jaggi's cases in real time. That Jaggi Vasudev is utterly dishonest can be seen in his latest case of flicking the works of Palaniswami and falsely saying that Palaniswami was someone Jaggi Vasudev met in his past life. This is a serious joke and a serious crime.